So the new year is off to a not so good start. What we know so far about the attack in the French Quarter of New Orleans. So this was a New Year's Eve attack on Bourbon Street in the heart of New Orleans's world famous sort of party district. At least 15 people were killed and dozens more injured in the early hours of New Year's Day after a man drove a pickup truck into crowds in the French Quarter of New Orleans and then opened fire before he was killed in a shootout with the police. Officials called it a deliberate attack and said the man, a 42-year-old U.S. Army veteran from Texas, had the flag of the Islamic State in his truck. That's ISIS, of course. The FBI said it was investigating the episode as a potential act of terrorism. In brief remarks to reporters, at Camp David, President Biden said he had been told by the FBI that the driver had posted videos on social media only hours before the attack, indicating he was inspired by ISIS. So here's one of the last times we'll hear from Biden as President of the United States.
Our hearts are with the people of New Orleans after the despicable attack that occurred in the early morning hours. To all the families of those who were killed, to all those who were injured, to all the people of New Orleans who are grieving today, I want you to know, I grieve with you. The nation grieves with you.
Gotta
We're going to stand with you as you mourn and as you heal in the weeks to come. I want to thank our brave first responders and law enforcement personnel who stopped the attacker in his tracks before he could kill or injure even more people. I want to thank you to everyone at the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, including the FBI, for working nonstop to investigate this heinous act. The FBI is leading the investigation to determine what happened, why it happened, and whether there was any continuing threat to public safety. Here's what we know so far. The FBI has reported to me the killer was an American citizen, born in Texas. He served in the United States Army on active duty for many years. He also served in the Army Reserve until a few years ago. The FBI also reported to me that mere hours before the attack, he posted videos on social media indicating that he was inspired by ISIS, expressing a desire to kill. The ISIS flag was found in his vehicle, which he rented to conduct this attack. Possible explosives were found in the vehicle as well, and more explosives were found nearby. The situation is very fluid, and the investigation has a preliminary stage. And the fact is that right now, there you go. The law enforcement and intelligence community are continuing to look for any connections, associations, or co-conspirators.
Yeah, it's a shame he dropped out. He had that election in the bag.
It would have buried Trump.
Would have buried him.
He had only stayed in.
And he was totally fit for 4 more years, that guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing. That's one thing that one box off on the bingo card that we hadn't checked off yet that now we could check off. Add that to Joe Biden's record. ISIS comes back, right? Remember ISIS? We haven't heard from ISIS in a while, but apparently they are behind this attack, or an ISIS-inspired
behind it or
attack.
Inspired.
Well, it's tough to tell where one begins and the other ends, since they could very well brand this guy, label this guy an ISIS combatant. Like Joe said there, it's a fluid situation. Who knows? This could be obsolete by this afternoon, but we do our best with the breaking news. The man sped a truck around a police car blocking Bourbon Street at about 3:15 a.m. Wednesday morning.
I was going to say, you can't even drive on Bourbon Street.
Yeah, no, he just broke through the barricades. Yeah, that is pedestrian only. He then opened fire, officials said, and died in a shootout with police. 2 of those injured in the attack were police officers, officials said. This man was trying to run over as many people as he possibly could, the New Orleans police superintendent, Ann Kirkpatrick, said at a news conference Wednesday. He was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did. So here is a map showing you the plan of action there. That was the turn around the car there. The truck went onto the sidewalk to get around the police car and then down Bourbon Street, which is, as Russell said, as someone who's been to New Orleans, quite a few times, he knows this area well. That is pedestrian only. So obviously,
Yeah, that's the beginning of Bourbon Street where the truck entered.
right. So you could obviously do a lot of damage there if people are walking in the streets and you drive your truck straight through. And this was just, like I said, a horrible
That's
scene.
especially New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
On any given weekend, that street is packed with people from one end to the other. On New Year's Eve, it must be like Mardi Gras.
Yeah, exactly. So just a horrible scene, obviously. Investigators said they found what appeared to be improvised explosive devices in the truck and were trying to determine whether the devices were viable. It is not clear if any such devices were detonated. Alethea Duncan, an FBI official, did not rule out that there could be an ongoing threat, saying that agents were running down leads in an effort to try and make sure that there was no further danger. The man who drove the truck onto Bourbon Street was identified by the FBI as Shamsud Din Bahar Jabbar, a 42-year-old U.S. citizen from Texas. The truck, which officials said carried the flag of the Islamic State, held weapons as well as the improvised explosive devices, and potential bombs were also found elsewhere in the French Quarter, officials said. Mr. Jabbar served almost 8 years in the U.S. Army and deployed to Afghanistan from February 2009 to January 2010, according to an Army representative. He transferred to the Army Reserve after leaving active duty in January 2015 and then left the reserves as a staff sergeant in July 2020, the Army said. In a YouTube video from 2020 that appears to have been posted by Mr. Jabbar, he spoke positively about his skills in a post-military career in real estate. He said he had been born and raised in Beaumont, Texas. I've been here all my life with the exception of traveling for the military, he said. He said that in his 10 years in the armed forces, he had worked as a human resources specialist and an information technology specialist. So that was the first attack. Yesterday, one dead after a Cybertruck explodes outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. And you talk about an image. I mean, that is contender for image of the year already. One person was killed and at least 7 were injured after a Tesla Cybertruck exploded outside the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas on Wednesday morning, the authorities said, and officials were investigating any possible links to an earlier attack on a crowd in New Orleans. Sheriff Kevin McMail of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department said during a news conference that the authorities believe this to be an isolated incident, but have not yet ruled out a connection to the Wednesday morning attack in New Orleans that killed at least 15 people. More on that in a moment. Sheriff McMail said the authorities had found gas canisters, camp fuel canisters, and large firework mortars in the back of the truck. It was unclear how they had been ignited, Sheriff McMail said. There is no further threat to the community, Sheriff McMail said. As of Wednesday afternoon, there was no indication that the explosion was connected to ISIS, which President Biden said had inspired the New Orleans attack, but the investigation remains ongoing, he said. At a news conference on Wednesday, Jeremy Schwartz, the acting FBI special agent in charge in Las Vegas, said the agency is investigating whether the explosion was, quote, an act of terrorism or not. I know everybody's interested in that word and trying to see if we can say, hey, this is a terrorist attack, Mr. Schwartz said. That is our goal, and that's what we're trying to do. So the reason there was some confusion about this, even though obviously the timing seems hardly coincidental given the attack in New Orleans the night prior, is that apparently there were no fatalities in this explosion except the driver himself. So there was a question, could this have been an accident? Elon was emphatic it was not an accident because he definitely wants you to know that those Cybertrucks do not explode on their own unless they're sabotaged. So he was really out in front of this.
Except for the one last week.
Right, yeah. Except for the ones that cut your leg off if you close the door too fast or whatever it is. We did that whole segment on the Jimmy show.
Was it one of the cars or was it a Cybertruck that went on fire and the people couldn't get out? It was like a couple of weeks
I think
ago.
that was one of the cars, actually. I think that was a Tesla. Yeah, I don't think that was that was just one of the car models. But we did have breaking developments overnight. Now, this was put out by ABC 7, their local Denver station. So this is, reported by a, fairly credible outlet. We cannot confirm it yet, but this has been making the rounds because it was reported by a credible outlet here. Suspects in Vegas explosion, New Orleans attack served at same Army base. Sources tell Denver 7 investigate. So, assuming this is true, which at this moment we don't have reason to believe it isn't, we can't confirm it and report it as 100% fact, but you have an outlet here saying they have sources saying that they went to the same Army base. That is the plot thickening significantly. That is a link that authorities had been looking for since the second event, obviously at the Trump Hotel in Vegas. So the Colorado Springs resident, so the reason this was reported on in Denver is because the truck was rented from Colorado. So the Colorado Springs resident suspected of detonating a Tesla Cybertruck in front of a Las Vegas hotel, and the Texas man accused of driving a pickup truck into a crowd on Bourbon Street in New Orleans served at the same military base, sources told Denver 7 investigates. Authorities were investigating the link as a possible connection between the two New Year's Day attacks, those sources said. Well, yeah, that seems fairly obvious if this checks out, which they're saying it does. Matthew Livelsberger, who is the driver of the Cybertruck, apparently, is accused of renting a Cybertruck in Colorado Springs, driving it to Nevada, and packing it with firework mortars and gas cans before exploding it in front of the Trump International Hotel in Vegas Wednesday morning, killing himself and injuring 7 others. Shamsuddin Jabbar is suspected of plowing through a crowd in New Year's revelers in the French Quarter hours earlier, killing at least 15 and injuring dozens more in an attack that sent shockwaves through a famous New Year's destination the morning of a scheduled college football playoff game. Both men were confirmed to be Army veterans in the aftermath of the attacks, both of which were being investigated as possible acts of terrorism. Late Wednesday, multiple informed sources told Denver 7 chief investigator Tony Kovaleski of the link between the two suspects' military service. So it comes from multiple sources, not just one, but multiple sources are saying this now. Both men use vehicles rented from the Turo car rental marketplace, which is like an app you could rent. Like people basically rent their own private. It's like the Airbnb, but for cars. Right, people have cars and they'll rent it out, and they charge you by the mile, whatever. I rented a Turo when I was in LA last. In a statement, a Turo spokesperson said the company did not believe either suspect had a criminal background that would have identified them as a security threat. Jabbar enlisted in the Army in March 2007. We read those biographical details in the last piece. We don't have to go through that again. Authorities do not believe Jabbar, who was killed by officers, acted alone in the truck rampage. Denver 7 is working to learn more about Livelsberger's background. Federal agents were staking out one of multiple Colorado Springs addresses associated with him late Wednesday, awaiting a search warrant. So that is certainly quite chilling if they both came from this same military base. That would suggest something pretty sinister. Candace Owens just tweeted out. I just saw it once we started the countdown. This was literally breaking to the point where I couldn't even put it in the show, in the slide, but I'll read you her tweet. I bookmarked it. She said, the New Orleans terrorist and the guy who blew up the Tesla truck both had served at the same Army base. Given what we know about the history of sadistic government programs in our military, this brings forth more questions than answers. Yeah, I mean, that's a consideration as well. So it's very strange. I mean, that stinks. And I don't mean stinks like it sucks. I mean, that smells fishy. If they both served at the same Army base, it suggests obviously a coordination between them, given the coincidental timings of the attacks. And yeah, it does raise a lot of questions. Like, I don't know where you go next as a journalist, because looks like there's going to have to be a visit paid to this Army base. Looks like there's going to have to be some research done on this base, and that could be dangerous work.
Excuse me, just one more question. Yeah. Why does Al Qaeda never attack Israel?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that could be That could be dangerous work. Obviously, just a horrible start to the year. There was a shooting in Queens last night. I mean, even if you don't suspect the kind of foul play that, frankly, I do, you're looking at symptoms of social collapse. You're looking at a very, very fractured social fabric here, heading into an administration that inherits Miriam Adelson's wish list for greater Israel expansion, promising crackdowns on dissent. This kind of instability, whatever, like, it's too soon to say definitively what these were, right? I mean, we know they were. I think it's fairly safe to say they were terrorist attacks, right? I mean, that's fairly obvious at this point. In terms of what's not obvious, what we can say is that this kind of instability ahead of an administration that we know is going to try and crack down on dissents, on protests. Yep. We're going to get into that in the next segment. It's a recipe for very, very, very difficult and potentially frightening times. This is not 2017. I've said this over and over again. Don't think that because when Trump took office in 2017 and the most newsworthy story of that year was Rachel Maddow losing her shit about Russian collusion. Don't assume it's going to be those kind of fun and games this time. It is not. This is a much more dangerous world. It's a much more fragile world. They are gearing up to really, I think, make this country resemble something it hasn't in a while. And so hang on to your hats. Hang on to your hats. And look, this is this is a difficult segue. But this is why I think we as a left, as an opposition, have to really get serious. Because this kind of environment, this is a recipe for fascism, for just absolute fascism.
Well, of course, the Patriot Act laid the groundwork for fascism. All you got to do is throw the switch. Once you have the legal precedent that you can detain someone without charges indefinitely by calling them a terrorist, well, all bets are off. Right. Over in the years since the Patriot Act was created, the surveillance technology is beyond anything they imagined at that time. Here in New York and in many cities, but particularly in New York, there's a fucking camera everywhere. Everywhere you go, you're on camera. Everywhere you go, you're on camera. And it's like that in a lot of major cities. The way you're being tracked online, all of your activity is being stored someplace, right? Everything you're doing online is being stored someplace. They can grab pretty much anybody if they just decide to do it, if they have the will to do it. I do not understand why anybody would be celebrating Crazy Eyes with the Manson lamps over there. Patel, a guy coming in who's talking about how we're not doing enough for Israel, in combination with an AG nominee who says that she wants the FBI questioning protesters. I don't understand why anyone who cares about speech and civil liberties would think this is a good thing, would be celebrating the nomination of these people. They're telling you very clearly what they're going to do. And yes, things like this, whatever the motive, whatever the reality behind it happening, it is certainly going to function as a pretense for people like Patel, people like Bondi, people like Trump to go ahead and do what they have given every indication they want to do, weaponize the government against dissent.
Absolutely. Yes. Took the words right out of my mouth. I just want people to understand. We're not saying that the people named in these reports are not guilty of doing what, I mean, we are going based on the reporting. We're not saying that. Obviously, a guy drives a truck through a crowd of people. The first guy we know that's confirmed, seems like both of those names are confirmed. And those are, of course, acts of terrorism. So we're not saying that they shouldn't be cracked down upon. What we're saying is that, as Russell just said, and you took I was going to mention those three names: Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Donald Trump. You don't think this crowd is going to come into office in this kind of environment and use these events as justification to greatly expand executive power? You got rose-tinted eyeglasses on.
Yep.
You got, like, this environment.
The man wrote a children's book in which he plays a wizard defending King Donald.
Right.
I'm sorry. What if that was a Democrat? What if that was a Democrat nominee? The MAGA would not stop mocking the person and screaming about how dangerous it is to put someone like that as the head of the FBI. It's okay because it's Trump. Come on.
Yeah. So to have this stuff going on 3 weeks away from this transition, you're really setting the table for some dark shit. It really sets the table for some really dark stuff. And these events themselves are obviously very dark and very troubling. The fact that now we're seeing a resurgence of ISIS after the regime change in Syria is complete, like I said, raises more questions than answers at this point. Now, we don't have anything to go on except our suspicions about that. More information will come out. There's going to be some visits paid to this military base. We're going to have to find out what's going on there. So there will be a lot more to talk about as it pertains to these events as more information comes out. But what we can say pretty confidently now is that this is setting the table for a very, very tumultuous year under an administration that is not going to be shy about using events like this as a pretext to, like I said, just greatly expand executive power at the expense of civil liberties. I don't think there's any real question about that.
Yep.
Please clap.